Hi, I'm Tamara, and this is TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Hi, everyone. Today, my guest is Sara Wachter-Boettcher. She's an expert in how to improve work culture. Today, we talk about how to go from burnout to bounce back and what's the difference between a manager and a leader. Enjoy. Hi, Sara. It's great to see you.
Hey, Tamara. Great to see you too.
Okay, so we have a lot to talk about. I'm fascinated by, how our workplaces have changed over the pandemic the last couple of years and the work culture and your new book, Technically Wrong Sexist Apps. There's a lot to cover here. So let's start with, you're the founder of Active Voice, which is a leadership development company. Can you maybe, what is Active Voice? I mean, I know what having an active voice is, but I'm really curious what an active voice is to you.
Sure. I also am familiar with having an active voice. It's one of the things that was always on my report cards growing up. Sometimes pro, sometimes con. So Active Voice, what we do is leadership work, broadly speaking, for people in tech and design. And our focus is very much on how do we actually help people lead in ways that are more true to them, that avoid burnout, which big topic right now for obvious reasons, and that help people also make courageous choices around the sort of responsibility and ethics of what they work on. And I actually started that company in February of 2020, coming out of a career doing more consulting with tech companies. So I had been working in UX and content design and helping organizations, make sense of their digital experiences, and then working with tech companies specifically around more inclusive and ethical design practices. And that's where Technically Wrong came in. And as I was talking to companies about that, what happened over and over again is that I would feel so compelled to talk to the people who wanted to share information about their work lives and their challenges and their struggles and their feelings of I care about all of this stuff. I want to make our product design process more inclusive. I want to think about our company's culture and how that shows up as bias in the things we create. But I don't feel like I'm listened to in meetings, but I'm already overwhelmed, but I can't get any influence with stakeholders, above my level. All of these things that would come up that really came back down to who is heard and respected in our workplaces and who isn't. And what are the systems, structures, processes, et cetera, that make change hard or make change possible? And so that led into, wait a second, I could work with people and I could really make that more of the heart of what I do. And so now what I really focus on is how do we actually talk with one another? How do we communicate? How do we stop avoiding hard stuff and talking through it? But also, how do we build organizational cultures that are safer and healthier and don't absolutely destroy people in the way I think we've all heard over the past 2 years? People have felt just oftentimes wrecked by work on top of everything else going on.
I mean, your expertise is tech and design, but this sounds like it could be any workplace.
Yeah. So I focus on tech and design because it's sort of it's where I come from. And frankly, the need is great. So it's that's enough. But I think that one of the things I've been finding is that, the things people are telling me who work in tech and design are absolutely things that could be anywhere. I just did this big survey, again, mostly, UX, engineering, product people. We got 225 responses that are just rich, long, detailed things where people were talking about how they've changed over the past couple of years and whether their organizations have been supportive. And it's a lot of stuff that is real disappointing. So much of it has been really reduced down to the individual and the idea that if you were just more resilient, we'd fix this. And not as much emphasis on things like, where does our company need to make different choices? Where do we need to slow down? Where do we need to change expectations? Where do we need to think about what is going to create a sustainable workforce?
I'm guessing that working from home for some people has even put more of an emphasis on that.
Yeah, that's something that's been really interesting. I do a lot of coaching with people too. And so I've gotten to have all of these really intimate kind of one-on-one conversations throughout the past 2 years, right? So it's people trapped in their homes, and I would often be their sort of outlet to talk about workplace stress. And for so many people, the blurring of that boundary had some pros. Like there were people who were doing terrible commutes. I know people who are, living an hour and a half away from work and needing to go in every day. And those things are better. And there's definitely lots of people who would like to stay remote. But that erosion of a clear line between what is work and what is not work has been hard for people. And a lot of times there's mixed messages coming from their organizations. So they're told, like, it's okay to take a rest. It's okay. You don't have to answer stuff all night. But what they see and what they hear is actually that is what is expected, because those are the people who are being told that they're doing a great job. Those are the people who were rewarded in the organization. In this survey, I was saying, a huge number of the responses, it was almost surprising when I asked people, what could your manager do to support you better right now? A huge number of the responses were something along the lines of like, my manager should actually take time off. My manager needs to rest. My manager needs to stop doing work at all hours, because it is really creating a culture in which that's the expectation for everyone. And that was really interesting, paired with a question I asked managers, which is like, what's been a struggle for you? And for so many of them, what they said was, feeling the tension between taking care of themselves and taking care of their teams, and often taking care of their teams at the expense of themselves. And so on the one hand, you have these managers who think, I can't take a break because I need to take care of my people. And then the impact is that the people are like, my manager won't take a break, so I can't turn off either. And that doesn't work for anyone. Like, right? Terrible cycle. People get wrapped up in it. And so, a lot of what I'm really thinking about is, okay, we need to reset some norms. And I think start having bigger conversations around what are the policies, what are the structures, what are the things that actually support people having boundaries. It's one thing to say, like, you should have boundaries, but is all the messaging internally actually aligning with that? And when you set a boundary, is it respected? And do you feel safe? Like if you say, no, I can't do that meeting, right? That's after the end of my day, especially with global teams. It's another big issue. People working from all over the place now. Your day end and my day end might be very different times. And to say no, if that doesn't feel safe, if I feel like I'm going to be perceived as not a team player or, not all the way in, then you may tell me I can have boundaries, but can I? Is that actually a thing I can do and still protect my career?
I was going to say, because a lot of workplaces are extremely competitive, even though that's not something that's said out loud. It's this underlying, idea that it is competitive. If another job comes up, well, who's going to get it? Is it going to be the person that would set up their boundaries and said, oh, I can't take any calls after 6 p.m.? Or is it the other person who is accepting all the calls 24 hours a day?
Yeah. And I think that, we really need changes at every level there. Like at the organizational level, how do we think about who we reward and why, and what does a top performer look like? I think those are important conversations. I think at a manager level, thinking about who you're elevating, whose work you're complimenting, how you're assigning work, how you are, figuring out who can take a lead role on something, that should probably come into question. At the individual level, again, just saying, just have boundaries doesn't cut it. But I think at the individual level, what we can do is the only thing we can do at any point, which is figure out what is actually within our control. And to say, okay, this is the reality. It's not that I have to do this. I don't have to take the call after 6 p.m. I may feel pressured to take the call after 6 p.m. And so I may make the choice to take the call after 6 p.m. because I'm scared of the alternative. I'm scared of the risk of the alternative. And the risk of the alternative is maybe there's a hit on your career, maybe there's a hit on your performance review. And what's important about that is that, as an individual, that doesn't solve the big structural problem. But what it does do is it does remind you, okay, I'm making a trade-off here. And what that does is that helps you then go, okay, is that trade-off actually worth it to me? So I'm making a trade-off. I am trading my boundaries for additional visibility and potential career success. Now, instead of saying I have to do that, it's, okay, I'm making a choice. It's not a fair choice, but it's a choice. And now, is that worth it to me? Like, do I want to move up the ladder in this organization that doesn't respect my boundaries? Is this valuable enough to me? And that's been another interesting thing. Getting so much feedback that people are saying, you know what? I've realized I don't want to wrap my whole identity up in work. I don't want to be just a worker bee. I don't care about moving up the ladder. Saying things like, I want to work 3 days a week. I want to, have a job that allows me to turn off at the end of the day. Those kind of responses, I'm hearing that left and right.
That's so interesting because it is a real shift. And I think the pandemic has had some lessons in there for people to prioritize what is important for their own well-being, right? When you take a look around and go, wait a minute, what is important here? Life is fragile. So let's talk about who you've heard from. So I'm wondering, when you're hearing this feedback about, workplace, is it mostly women who are not being treated or feel like they're not being treated fairly? Is it people of color? Is it men? Who is it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will say that in my practice, in my company, we work with people of all genders. We definitely focus more on women. Like we have programs that are specifically around issues that women face because gender bias is a real thing in the workplace. And a big part of my work is also thinking about that intersectionally. So thinking about, what does that mean for people of color? What does that mean for women of color? What about folks who are gender nonconforming? So that's all part of what I focus on day to day. Knowing that oftentimes it's often that it's not that like necessarily the problems are wholly different, but often the problems are exacerbated for those groups. So groups, and particularly it's like the more, intersections of oppression that you might have in your identity, the more those things are exacerbated. And so power dynamics show up more, feelings of powerlessness might show up more because, well, you may have also had that reinforced externally a lot over time. And so I do think that's a big piece of it. In the survey that we did, we collected some information from respondents so we could get a sense of like who's actually included here, because this was definitely pulled from like Active Voices network, right? So it's not like statistically, this is a qualitative survey primarily for the kinds of organizations that we work with. And so asked of people who work in those organizations, which biases it toward people who are like already a little bit closer to me. That said, in it, we had about 2/3 of the people were women who responded. Some of that is that a large percentage of our audience is women, and a large percentage of our audience is also design focused, and design trends more toward women in the workplace than, for example, engineering trends more toward men. And mix of people of different backgrounds. So age groups, the biggest ones were mostly people in their, let's say, late 20s through mid 40s, kind of that real meaty center of the career. That's where the majority of respondents were age-wise. Racial and ethnic demographics, I'm hearing this from, again, across the board, probably about 25 or 30% of the respondents for this particularly were Black, Indigenous, or other people of color. I think, though, that the real thing I'm hearing is that these are issues that impact everybody. These are issues that are on more people's minds than they were in the past, even people who maybe in the past would have not thought about it. So like issues around flexibility, for example, were on the minds of a lot of parents, and particularly moms, before the pandemic. Exacerbated through the pandemic. But I'm seeing those kinds of issues and things like I need to think about how I take care for my family coming up much more often, also with like cis heterosexual men who are in married relationships who maybe in the past, some of those concerns were a little more distant for them, and they feel them now. And they're like, wait a second, I don't want to be so focused on work that I'm not present as a parent. I don't want to be burdening my spouse who's dealing with all of this as well. And so I'm seeing that coming up as well.
Okay, so what is the difference then between a manager? You've been talking about management. What's the difference between a manager and leadership? Is there a difference between leadership and a manager?
It's interesting. There's this organization that does a lot of manager training in tech called Raw Signal Group. They're actually based in Toronto, and they do great work. And they have this thing that they talk about. I want to quote them. I'll probably quote them sort of wrong. But they say something like, it's a lot of middle managers, like direct people managers, kind of opt out of thinking of themselves as leaders who hold power in an organization. And they're like, that's a really wild thing to say, because they directly hold power over their team, and they are directly responsible for implementing decisions of leadership, executive leadership or senior leadership. So that said, I would say that anybody who holds organizational power through a leadership role is a form of leader, or at least like has leadership traits or leadership responsibilities. But there's also levels, right? So there are differences. And I think people who are kind of those frontline managers, where they are in the middle, they are responsible for implementing or like selling in, like making you feel good about the policies that management is setting, right? I think that people at that level, they don't have all the power. There are some limitations to what you can do at that level. You can advocate upwards for better policies for your people. You can support your people downwards. You can try to protect them, but you're not calling all the shots. The shots you might be calling are sometimes pretty limited. I think that it's important to think about those folks, though, as having power, because I think once you acknowledge that you have power, you can look at like, okay, where do I have that power? And what do I want to do with it? Which I think are crucial questions for everybody to be asking. Where do I have power, and what do I want to do with that in order to be the kind of leader I want to be, in order to be the kind of human I want to be? What is the best way to use the power that I do have? Versus, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that. All of which might be true, but that puts you in the place of sort of not reckoning with the power you do have. But I think senior leaders could be doing a lot, because there is a huge amount of top-down power in most companies to say, this is our policy, this is what's standard, this is the norm, and this is how that's going to look, and to actually roll out tools or guidelines or other things that could change stuff, right? In terms of like, your manager might have control over what's in your performance review in terms of like what they say about you. What they probably don't have control over is which metrics are used to decide whether you're doing a good job or not. And I think we can think about how we can address things at both of those levels.
So you use the term, excuse me, worker bee. Can you be a worker bee and still be a leader?
I have a lot of opinions about leadership. I would say that, I think worker bee is not something anybody really needs to be. I would encourage everybody to think of themselves as sort of the leader of themselves, and to think about what can I and what do I want to give to this organization? What is important to me? And to really get out of that mentality that you have to do kind of what the organization asks. Because that's what a worker bee does, right? It's like very straightforward. It's you are working at the direction of, and sort of like completely beholden to, right? Like the leadership of the hive, in that metaphor. And so when you think about an organization, I think when you get into that mindset, again, it makes you feel really powerless, and it makes you feel like you don't have choices. And that feeling of powerlessness, that really contributes to burnout. We talk a lot about like overwork, stress, those contribute to burnout. Yeah, but when you feel powerless, you feel like you're spinning in place. You're expending a lot of energy, but you're not going anywhere. You are in an elevated like stress state all the time, because when we feel powerless, we feel under attack, right? So it's easy to be defensive. Yeah, that'll burn you out. You could be working 5 hours a week, but if you feel powerless in that way, you could still get burned out. And so I think that that's important to remember too, is that identifying places where you have power, and then what those choices are in front of you. And then if you're making a trade-off, that acknowledging I'm making a trade-off and these are my reasons, and maybe I don't want to do that anymore. Or maybe I do, right? Maybe I need to do that, like to keep my family's income stable. Sure. But even just that acknowledgement that acknowledgement of choice, unfair, limited, difficult choices, not easy ones. But even that helps people feel a little bit more in control of their lives. And even that alleviates some of that powerlessness and stress.
Yeah, exactly. That makes sense. Yeah, it's like a shift. You're shifting the way you're presenting yourself to yourself almost, That's what it sounds like to me. Okay, so I obviously I have some more questions and I want to talk about your new book. But before we do that, we like to thank our guests on this podcast for giving your time to be here and share your expertise, and we really appreciate it. So we ask our guests to choose a Canadian nonprofit organization, and we give them $500 on your behalf, and you chose the Indian Residential School Survivors Society, which provides essential services to residential school survivors, their families, and people dealing with intergenerational trauma. So thank you so much for choosing them, and we will be giving them $500 in your name. So thank you for that, Sara.
Thank you so much for doing that. Yeah, that was...
We appreciate your time, and we really appreciate you choosing them. Okay, so let's talk about your coaching and your, and going from, burnout to having the energy to, create a better workplace for yourself. So how do people do that? What do you suggest how do you recognize burnout?
Okay, there's some classic symptoms that I'm probably not going to do a good diagnostic job here, but that are around things like increased sense of depersonalization, like you feel distant from people, maybe distant from yourself, exhaustion, foggy brain comes up a lot for people. There's a lot of feeling of just, I can't even try. I can't bother with this. I have no energy for it. A lot of it is also if you start noticing that you don't care about things you used to care about. And, this is a rough one right now because for a lot of people, the world has changed and their lives have changed. And so sometimes you don't care about the things you used to care about just because you're different now. And so that can also be rough if you haven't figured out, what does current you care about? Which can be a huge thing. That doing that kind of work can also help ward off burnout because you can then start trying to optimize for getting that into your day. But really recognizing that when you're feeling those feelings, those are definitely signs of burnout. And when burnout gets very bad, oftentimes people also get very, very cynical. I mean, I'm sure you've seen this when somebody shows up cynical at work, and that's very hard to come back from, right? Where they're starting to just naysay everything. It feels like their defenses are up all the time. All of those behaviors where they're maybe lashing out at their colleagues, that is oftentimes what happens when things get really bad. And so burnout hurts the individual, but it also really can hurt the people around them. And that's something I really think about is we've all been through a lot. And I think most of us really want to be healthy and supportive to the people around us, and to know that not only is your burnout harming you, but that you're also harming others can also be a little bit of a wake-up call, I think, for people. But yeah, you said, how do you get out of that, or how do you start to break that cycle? I think a big piece of it is recognizing that regardless of whether you've had it good during the pandemic, which a lot of people will say, but I've had it pretty good compared to others, could have been worse, et cetera, et cetera. What that does is that sort of disallows you from feeling your feelings. It says I don't deserve to have these feelings because I've had it good. So therefore, I should just push that down. And to instead say, no, wait, this is impacting me. And this isn't about comparing your experience to anybody else's. It's just saying, this is impacting me. What impact is it having? What am I feeling? And even just allowing yourself to ask some questions and ideally talking with others about it, talking with friends, do you have a manager you really trust? Do you have a partner you trust? Can you talk to a therapist, which I would recommend to pretty much anyone, frankly. You can just talk about what's happening inside of me right now. How is this changing me? What am I feeling? what are the fears I have? So often we get plagued by fear, and particularly the past couple of years, it's like, there's lots to be afraid of. That's okay. Can you acknowledge that? Can you get more comfortable naming those things? Because once you can name them, you can actually start to see the shape of them and work out how to process those feelings and move on from them. It's when we don't name them and when we deny our feelings. I shouldn't feel so bad. I shouldn't do this. This is a big one for women. I shouldn't be angry. Because we've oftentimes really been trained that being nice, being helpful, right? All of these things are what you're supposed to be. And so if you're angry, oof. Also, some groups, women in general, and I would say particularly Black women, are treated very poorly for being angry oftentimes. So there's like real reasons that you might feel like being angry is not acceptable because there might be real consequences to being angry. So when we cut that off, we say, I shouldn't feel that way. Okay. You don't stop being angry. You are still angry. Because like, that's not how it works, right? You're just angry.
Yeah.
But what happens, okay, so now you're angry. And you've just added this little layer of shame on top. So I'm angry, but I feel bad that I'm angry. I feel like I shouldn't feel angry. And so we haven't done anything about the anger, and we've layered in something else that just makes it harder. So once we can say, okay, I'm angry. Now, you may or may not be able to express that anger to everybody. You may or may not feel safe telling everybody that you're angry. There may be consequences to that. But even knowing that for yourself and then being able to work through where is that coming from and what do I need here? It does so much to start to, again, lower some of those stress levels and also just keep you in a place where you're not making decisions from a reactive zone. So, right, like you're stressed, you're angry, whatever is going on, knee-jerk reactions. We are not at our best. Instead, to be like, okay, bring it back, slow it down. I can slow my brain down and get into that higher order thinking where I can really go, what are my choices here? What trade-offs work for me, right? All of those other questions we talked about. That plays a tremendous role in figuring out what is going to be right for you for getting to a place of healing or getting to a place where work is sustainable. And that's going to look different for different people, but getting to that initial little bit of distance, spaciousness, that's like the spark that's going to let the rest of it happen.
Yeah, I love it. It makes sense. Easier said than done sometimes when your feelings are heightened, let's say. It's hard to sometimes reel it back in because you're right, especially women are carrying a lot right now at home and at work. So tell me about technically wrong sexist apps.
Yeah, sexist apps, biased algorithms, and other threats of toxic tech.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. You know, like I said, I work mostly with people in tech and design, and my history is really working on products before I focused on the people, right? It was like, we're going to work on products. And what I found over and over was just that there were so many teams that were largely pretty undiverse, and they were oftentimes making a lot of design decisions and technical decisions that didn't necessarily think about who they could be harming, biases that exist in the world that were getting reinforced, who they were leaving out, assumptions they were making. And that just runs the gamut. It runs the gamut from like very surface level design decisions, I'm thinking about things like the peppy little copy on a button that's like, let's go. But actually it's being used in a scenario where you are grieving, or let's say a fertility app that is very focused on everybody wanting to get pregnant. And it turns out a lot of their user base is trying to not get pregnant, or is insensitive about somebody who maybe experiences a pregnancy loss. Like there's so many things like that are more surface level, right? Like how do we actually interact with people? And then also very deep stuff. So thinking about things like the algorithmic side of it, which there's since that book has come out, there's been a ton more books out about algorithmic bias. It's become a big topic. But one of my goals is really just to connect the dots that a lot of these things come from the same sources. And it's like teams that aren't thinking about the potential impact of their work and who it could harm, and lack of diversity on those teams. Diversity alone will not solve all your problems, but it will introduce you to additional perspectives and viewpoints and contexts that maybe you weren't aware of otherwise. But really connecting all of those dots and saying like all of these things are coming out of some of the same places, which is, organizations that have been so focused on, let's say, scaling fast that they haven't really spent enough time thinking about what is their responsibility, what are the ethics of what they're doing, and what happens when it turns out your product harms people.
Wow.
Yeah.
I feel like we could go another half hour just on that.
Yeah.
Wow. My goodness. It's so fascinating, Sara, like the work that you're doing. And I have to say, when we're talking about it, I can see how this, like I said at the beginning, this is not just in your area of expertise. It feels like it's just everywhere, really.
Yeah.
It speaks to, my past working in bigger companies and stuff, and all the things that you said. So, and obviously as we move forward, sexist apps and everything you just said makes me think about my young daughters and the digital world and, women and how it affects us and the messages we're being sent all the time. So I love this. And just before we go, Collective Strength is your feminist leadership community and event series, right?
Yeah, that is actually on maybe a permanent hiatus.
Oh no! Okay, well you're so busy writing all these books. I don't know how you.
That was a Philly-based thing. So we lived in Philadelphia, and we were running live events. They were so awesome before the pandemic. We moved some of them online, but you know what? There's just a time when you're like too many Zooms, right? So I think there's still a big question. What does it look like to bring more in-person events back? I'm not ready to run an in-person event series currently. So it's one of those things where I'm like, I loved what that was then. I don't think it would be the same thing now. And I cannot currently prioritize what it would be now. But I think that's what a lot of us are really craving too, though, is what is the space where we can actually come together to talk about things that matter to us, feel comfortable being ourselves, and also have some joy there. Yeah, I'll let you know when I figure out what that is now.
If you figure that out, you let me know ASAP.
Oh my gosh.
I want to be a part of that because it's true. It's like this, how do we connect again, right? And be stronger together, for sure.
I know.
I really appreciate your time, and I just want to mention your website is activevoicehq.com. Everything we talked about plus more is on that website. And also you are on Twitter at Sara, that's SARA _Ann, _Marie. That's your full name, is it? Sara Ann Marie?
Sure is.
I love it.
Yeah.
So good. Sara, you're amazing. Thank you so much for your time and your energy and for being a leader.
Thank you so much, Tamara. It's been great to chat with you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Be sure to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for another conversation. You can also check out our website, telus.com/podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at TELUS Talks.